What's going on?
Old films, Mr. Spencer. Classics, you might say. I've saved them for years, bits of them. We used to run them like this in the old days, but not for years we haven't done it. Now it seems like old times once more.
Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
And hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap. My name is David Seeley, and this is my esteemed co-host, the ecstatic gaucho himself, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Jono, how are you doing?
I'm well. Thank you very much, David. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right.
Yeah. Good.
So, today, listeners, is a very, very super special episode because we have an extra super special guest on the show tonight. Jonathan, would you like to introduce?
Yes, well, we have our second guest on Film Swap and our first guest from the United States. And that is Amelia Eichler. Yay! Exactly. Yes. Amelia Eichler. Hello, Amelia.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here.
Great. Well, you're also known as the Mistress of the Reel, and you work as the Assistant Theatre Manager at the USC Projection Services. That's, I think, the University of Southern California. Would that be right?
Yes, yeah.
That's what I thought. Yep. And so you live in LA, Los Angeles?
Yeah, I live in Los Angeles.
And you work in a genuine cinema?
I do. We actually have several theaters. We have about 5 theaters that I run around and manage. Yeah.
Wow. That's a lot. Well, I suppose I guess it's a large university.
It's one of the biggest film schools in the country, so that's why we have a lot of different theaters and we have a lot of students. So.
Okay. Yeah, and they got some famous alumni.
Sorry, Jono. I was just going to ask what the kind of what sorts of films do you show? Are they for the students, or are they open for public to come in and see?
We actually do both. So our main job description is to maintain and run films for the film school, so for classes and academic events. But then we also have people who program, I guess you could call them special events, where it's open to the public, it's free, and so you just have to reserve, and it's usually mostly new releases that come out in the US or international, so it's actually really fun and good for the students.
Definitely. Terrific. That sounds like you must see loads of interesting and sort of little seen films.
Yeah, also films I might never have seen otherwise, because it is a lot of... Surprisingly, we screen a lot of international films, which I'm actually really happy about because, as we'll talk about later, sometimes there's issues accessing international cinema in the US.
Well, I think sort of everywhere. Well, not everywhere, maybe, but so in Britain as well, we do definitely have our issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joe, there's been a couple of times when we've had some issues. We've decided on films that we're going to swap on an episode, and then for whatever reason, one of us will have some kind of an issue accessing it because the streaming services in the UK, there's really only a few. Obviously, the big hitters like Amazon and Disney and what's the other one? Netflix. Sorry, I couldn't think of it. Netflix, but their selection of films, at least in the UK, is pretty dire, and it's like anything that's older than 10 years old, you definitely usually will have a hard time trying to come across it. We do have a couple of smaller streaming services. The BFI runs the BFI player. Mubi's quite good for seeing newer sort of foreign films, and And then Arrow Video has a streaming service as well, which is really good for sort of cult
Oh yeah.
films and things like that. But basically, that's pretty much it in the UK.
Yeah.
So streaming is not always great for sort of hardcore cinema buffs who really want to see things and get hold of really obscure titles and things. That can be a bit of a challenge
Yeah.
sometimes. Yeah.
Definitely.
So, well, why don't we start today? We're going to do a film swab, and we're going to talk to Amelia a little bit about, because Amelia, I found you on Twitter basically because I noticed, aside from you did a couple of really great posts about sometimes you post pictures when in your cinema you get deliveries of the film canisters with
Oh
all
yeah.
the prints in them, and you post these great pictures of you standing amidst the Seven Samurai or some Fellini film or something, and you say, look, here's the print that is shown up, and so those were quite cool, and they kind of caught my attention. But then I noticed you also wrote a really great thesis, I guess a few years ago,
Yeah.
that was to do with kind of the dangers of losing physical media and the kind of dangers to preservation and access that streaming, the rise of streaming services and things is actually potentially has to for people to access films. And also you work a lot. I think you mentioned that you collect some film prints and things yourself, and you
Hmm.
have quite an interest in preservation and stuff. So I thought it'd be interesting just to get some of your observations on that as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
love bringing the projection, physical media side to a lot of conversations, especially projection, because I feel like, which makes sense when you're talking about films and analyzing them and discussing them historically. You don't really bring up, people don't really bring up projectors or how the film might have been shown in a theater. But I do think that's a really interesting and something I've gotten into, the past few years, a more interesting look at like the history of film and how film has evolved and maybe the pros and cons of each new technology that can affect how we view and see films.
hmm. Is it fair to say there's kind of a new generation that's coming up that won't ever actually know film as we knew it? Like I'm old enough, like I could show you here. I found this the other day when I was rooting through some boxes trying to find something else. That this is a film that I made years ago
Wow,
on
I love
16 millimeter film. And so I can remember back in the days of actually, splicing and,
that. Yeah,
hanging things up and all that kind of stuff. And now, of course, I do everything here on my computer, and it is all very much easier. And you have so many tools and things that you can use, but
yeah.
it is quite different, the experience of like actually physically working with something as well, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
kind
I
of a
think
different, it gives
also
you.
it's very dependent on where you live. I mean, especially in the US, I can't speak for the UK, obviously, but if you're in a smaller town, you have less access to physical media or seeing film on film. And so I just happened to be born in Portland, Oregon, which I consider, the maybe third, fourth best film city in the country. So I think that had a lot to do with how I was able to access these things. And I just happened to be born into a family where I have film buff family members. And so that also contributed. But I think, yeah, as we move more and more into like complex technology, with AI and all that, there are people who are going to be less interested in accessing kind of these more obscure ways of viewing and seeing film. And I mean, in college, when I went to college at Portland State University, they didn't really talk about physical film. That's one page in a chapter about the history of cinema, but it's not something that's we don't dwell on it or we don't talk about it in depth. So I think that I'm trying to do the opposite, where I'm trying to make it more accessible, get people more interested, especially people who've never seen a film projector or physical film at all. Just even having them touch it for, like 5 seconds, so I'm hoping that'll spark something in people, especially who are younger than me.
So I was wondering what you thought is the sort of difference in quality between a sort of real projected film compared
Hmm.
to a sort of digitally, I don't know, digitally projected film.
They're
Would you
both
say?
depending. I don't see a lot, we don't, at my job, we don't have 4K projectors or anything like that. We mostly have 2K,
Right.
but, and I'm sure I've seen 4K films be projected many times, but
Yeah.
35 is, especially 35, it's up there. I mean, it's comparable to digital.
Yeah.
And,
Mm.
obviously it depends on how beat up the print is, or, how new it is. But
Yeah.
to me, there's just something about seeing it on film. It's like, has character, you can see just like that it's real, that it's something you can touch and reach out to. And digital is, you know, behind all these servers and computer files, and it's just a little bit less accessible, or like something I can prove that's real, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
I quite the when you watch a lot of newer films on Blu-ray
Mhm.
and and 4K and things like that, and on streaming, there's this real, especially Disney's kind of the worst offender. They have a real
Oh yeah.
tendency with their older films to just scrub them to within an inch of their life and really make sure there isn't even the slightest bit of
Yeah.
blemish, and they alter the whole look and feel of them. But I
Yeah.
quite like seeing a few scratches and a few pops and the real change, little dot pop up in the
Mm.
corner and things like that. Because
Oh
to me,
yeah.
like you say, that kind of gives a little bit of character and that feel of experiencing it in the cinema, even if you're watching it at home. You know,
Yeah, I
it.
really wish they would stop sometimes removing changeover cues from discs. I
Mm,
mean, I understand they want to clean it up and they don't want a bunch of scratches and they want to make it the highest quality presentation possible, but I don't know, there's something comforting to me about seeing the cues, especially if I don't like the film. Then I at least
mm,
know maybe the film's almost over, depending
Yeah.
on how many cues I've seen.
yeah.
Well, I didn't know anything about them until I watched the Fight Club, where it becomes part of the sort of
Oh,
plot. And
yeah.
then I remember, I guess Fight Club came out about 99, 2000, and when the films were still on film. And I
Mhm.
remember it was a great thrill after that. Whenever I went to the cinema, I could, spot the and all that sort of stuff, which I'd never. I mean, I must have gone to hundreds of films before then, but never noticed them for some reason. Yeah,
Once you notice them, it's hard to unnotice them, which is funny.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
but it is all part of the charm and the experience of it, I think. Well, what do you think
Certainly.
about the fact that, because I know at the time, like in the 80s when the big home video boom started, and first it was with VHS and beta tapes and things, and then it moved on to DVD. But it became over those decades, kind of the 80s and 90s, it was a real sort of huge interest that swelled up
Mhm.
for people for old films and just collecting films and learning about films. If people had certain favorite actors or directors, they could go and collect up their whole,
Mhm.
back catalog of things, and it really sort of instilled a real interest in film. But now with the streaming, because they seem to very much be averse to showing any black and white titles, and they seem
Mhm.
to only stick to the really sort of really well-known popular classics. So it's very easy to see The Godfather and Saturday Night Fever and Grease and maybe one or two other things, and they kind of call those classics, which I suppose they are. Um,
Yeah.
but they don't really dig deep into the catalog. So, do you think there's a real danger that as things progress this way, that younger generation might not have that same interest in learning about older films and they won't have access to them in the same way. And that there's a real
Yeah.
danger that the interest will start to wane very much so.
Well, it's interesting because obviously as I say a lot of times, there's pros and cons every time there's a new technology. I mean, like you said with VHS, that allowed at least for people to revisit a lot of films that they may have forgotten about or discover a lot of new titles. But, a lot of films get lost every time we go to a new format because not every, a lot of it has to also do with money. A lot of studios only want to put out what they see is going to sell. So this obscure title from, the 30s or 40s, that may not be something they're willing to spend the money to put on, either tape, disc, laser disc. They might just say, oh, we can skip that one and put The Godfather because that'll sell. But yeah, I think that the positive outlook on streaming was that, oh, well, people can curate it and people can, Mubi does that sometimes. They do curations or retrospectives but like we see, things get removed, it's all algorithm, so it's pushing things that they think they want you to see,
Yeah, or
but
things that
not
they think.
necessarily, something that is obscure or it's usually well known.
Yeah, and
So
the thing is, if you watch a film with Chris Pratt going around shooting guys, then they're gonna keep putting up more films at you with Chris Pratt shooting guys.
yeah,
That's the way those algorithms work. They just basically say, well, they like that, so they'll like this and they'll like this. But what it doesn't entice you to do is actually explore and look and dig deeper and try and to maybe check out something that maybe you might not have thought about seeing, or
yeah,
maybe, a film that doesn't have Chris Pratt shooting guys in it. So it's like, those are the kind of the dangers of it I can see
yeah.
that it narrows people's focus to such an extent that they don't discover what's on the peripherals or underneath or dig a bit deeper. So
Yeah, and I think that there's so many streaming services now and there's so many, I mean, especially the studios that have decided to have a streaming service and then start turning out their own content. It
mm,
just there's no way to not get decision fatigue. And I mean,
mm.
I've had it and other people have had it where you just look at all these titles and then you end up not watching anything.
Yeah, yeah. I've
So,
actually had evenings where I can sit down with my partner and we'll look at the scroll through these lists of things, and by the time we actually have decided to pick on something and say, okay, let's watch that, it's sort of like, oh, it's bedtime. It's time
yeah.
to shut it off because you've spent the
Yeah.
last hour and a half instead of actually watching something. You've spent your time just sifting through this and these endless thumbnails.
Yeah,
So.
definitely. I've done that too. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. I
Well,
think
so,
it's also that unfortunate because I do see how streaming can allow people to see a lot of things that have been restored. They'll put out
Yeah.
2K, 4K,
mm,
the newest release. But again, it is usually only going to be titles that are popular already.
yeah,
It's like another re-release of this big title, and I've already seen The Godfather, so I don't know if I necessarily need to see it in 4K now from the street.
mm,
It's like also people, and I've experienced this working at a theater, and it makes sense. People are sometimes more comfortable with what they're familiar with, and so
mm,
a lot of people see it as a time issue of, well, if I invest this time in this new film that I don't know anything about, I may not like it. Maybe it's a waste of time. You start overthinking it too. And people sometimes just like to watch the same film that they've seen because they know it's going to be good. And so I think
mm,
sometimes the streaming services reinforces that a little bit to stick
yeah.
with what you already know as opposed to exploring more.
Well, yeah, businesses tend to, by their nature, be risk averse, and they're not
Yeah,
usually like, and you can see that phenomenon now, like on Disney Plus, so many remakes. They seem to be in this cycle now of remaking all their classic animated films as
yeah,
live action films, although they're mainly computer cartoons still, anyway. But
yeah,
the point being that they seem completely more comfortable just using something that has that brand familiarity
yeah,
rather than try something new and different that people haven't seen before.
yeah,
So that becomes the danger that you end up just losing that creativity and that sort of ability to try and reach out and try something a bit different.
yeah,
So that is another side effect of that. And I think the one thing that, because obviously Jonathan and I, especially are because we're old timers, and like I say, I've been collecting videos and things, and it's absolutely true that the presentation, the quality of the presentation at home has increased dramatically from the days when I was sort of a teenager, and we used to watch fuzzy, VHS tapes with the tracking errors and the scanned and panned pictures and and now some of these 4K, and I do have the 4K Godfather, the new one, and it is beautiful, stunning to see it that we have these big large flat screen TVs, and the
hmm,
resolution and everything is so amazing, and we've come such a long way. But you're right, at the same time there is that because there's so much sort of capital tied up in that stuff that people don't want to um, take any risks or try something different. So you talked a bit about the collecting over the years, because I know in your thesis you have you have a great sort of history of people collecting film at home, in the home,
yeah,
and I think I mentioned a few weeks ago in one of our previous episodes about how we have this phenomenon now because the streaming services have become so popular and so convenient for people. And when there's a new technology that comes out, people just have this tendency to just sort of throw the old stuff out and just say, "Oh, I don't need that anymore because I got this now, and it's much
yeah,
better." But then sometimes you can end up sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, don't you? Because you literally will throw away all that stuff, and then all of a sudden you realize that, oh, I used to have a copy of that film. I fancy watching it, and look, it's not on Netflix. It's not on Amazon. It's not, So, what would you say are the dangers in terms of losing on our kind of history and our heritage a little bit when people just sort of discard the old for in favor of the new technologies?
you know, at work we've experienced this, and I know that it's happened with other forms of media. Like a lot of people threw out their vinyl records, and now all of a sudden vinyl is back. And
I
now,
did that. I was one of them.
yeah, I have I bought a record player and I still have it. I've never thrown out any of my records unless I decided that I don't want to listen to them anymore, or I don't enjoy the band as much anymore. But yeah, I wish people weren't so ready to throw out everything just because something new comes along, because
Mm,
usually that frenzy dies down, and then you realize, like you said, you realize, once the dust settles, oh wait, I actually needed to access that in the future.
mm,
Hindsight is 2020, so I understand in the moment throwing everything out and just what's the next best thing. But I tend to keep most of what I have just because I know with streaming, it's not always going to be available. And if it's
mm,
something I enjoy watching, then why would I get rid of it? If it's not broken, don't fix it. I mean,
mm.
that's I mean, I've had the same VCR since before I was born. My mom bought a VCR and I still use it. It's more than 26 years old now and it still works
Wow, that's
and it's
amazing,
still
isn't it?
reliable.
Terrific.
So I will not throw it out anytime soon. Will not be throwing out my VHS tapes. And like I said before, a lot of things don't get moved on to the next. There's a bunch of probably films that were on DVD or Blu-ray that aren't making it to streaming. So
Yeah.
that's another reason why you shouldn't just be ready to throw out everything and say, well, I can access it on streaming. I would recommend doing a deep dive of what's on streaming that you already own, but also at the same time, even if it's on there right now, it may not be on there in the future. So I
Definitely.
think it is important to, you know, obviously if you're not going to watch something anymore, you don't like it anymore, you don't have to keep it.
Mm.
But for things that you do get a lot of, playability out of, you should definitely keep it if you have it on any other physical media, or if you have a digital file of something, you should definitely never get rid of it as well.
Yeah, it also brings up that interesting point that a lot of times people end up kind of now they're paying a monthly subscription for things that they may have already had, because they might have
Yeah,
already had a little selection of Disney animated films on their shelf on DVD or Blu-ray already, and then they say, "Oh, well, I got Disney Plus now, so I'll just get rid of all these. It's cluttering up my house. Let's get these out."
yeah,
But then actually, well, but you already had those, and now you're paying for them again. And if you
yeah.
stop paying, you're going to lose them again. So
When
it's kind of like this interesting side of it as well.
there was only Netflix, when there wasn't really any competition for streaming. There was Netflix and some other maybe more indie streaming services. It was easier to just subscribe to that one service and then keep your physical media, because there maybe was a few titles you wanted on Netflix. But then once everyone kind of moved over to just relying on streaming, and then all this competition started popping up and still continues to pop up. People are starting streaming services all over the place. It's not one cohesive library. There isn't one streaming service that owns everything. So now you're splitting up all your money to different services. I mean, of course, if you compare a cable bill, it's probably not as high as a cable bill would be, but
Yet. Yeah.
it's still a lot of, I mean, it's a lot of money now, actually.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's why, if I would recommend keeping and curating your own library if possible. I know it's not always feasible, especially space wise, and then just being able to subscribe to one service you really like and know you're going to use. I feel like that's a better bang for your buck, and also something that's easier to maintain.
Mm.
Yeah. Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. But that's something that's happened at work, is that everyone throughout the film, not everyone, because we still have film projectors at work, obviously.
Yeah.
But a lot of the film projectors were taken out, scrapped, and we didn't have a lot of 16 millimeter, which is mostly what's used in school, 16 millimeter. And then 35 if we're doing like a special feature event.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, as things started coming back after the pandemic, people were asking, oh, I'd like to see this on 16. And then, I was like, okay, let me just magically pull out a 16 millimeter projector.
Mm.
I mean, okay, now you want 16, because before no one wanted 16. So people decided to throw everything out, and now you want 16, but now we have to go find all this equipment.
Mm.
So, I mean, it happens at big institutions as well. They're finding out, oh, wait, probably should have kept all this equipment that we're now throwing out.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
they had a similar thing when sort of they started digitizing books. Lots of
Yeah.
libraries started sort of thinking, okay, well, we can sort of get rid of all those paper books,
Mm.
and then but then there's issues with that basically.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about that kind of relationship between preservation and sort of collecting, because as we say, when these new technologies develop and everybody throws everything away, there are these few sort of people like myself, as you could see, who just sort of hoard things, whatever, for whatever reason psychologically, that I kind of like to collect and curate
Mhm.
my own little library and have things that I'm interested in and keep them to hand. But over the years, a lot of really classic films. We were talking a few weeks ago about silent films and the fact
Oh
that
yeah.
so many, a huge percentage of all silent film has been lost forever just through decay, by things being thrown away because they didn't weren't seen to have any value anymore, because of the changes in technology and things, just things over the years. So much history has been lost, but a lot of things have been saved just through collectors over the years,
Yeah.
people who saved those show at home 16 millimeter prints, or they, collectors who would go into garbage scows and take out prints that film studios or cinemas had thrown away, and they took them and hoarded them in their basements and or in their cellars
Mhm.
and things. And it's only because they did that that there are some examples of really famous classic films that only still exist at all
Yeah.
because of that. So, what are your kind of thoughts on that, about the importance of the collector and the historian and educational institutions like yours that try to preserve these things?
Yeah, my mentor who taught me everything I know, he's been a projectionist for about 50 years. He has, through collecting film, actually contributed to a lot of, lost silent or early sound films. And I've actually seen, some elements that he's contributed to restorations and then seeing them actually presented to an audience, which is really incredible, to follow and see that through. There's also a book I would love to recommend to people called A Thousand Cuts. It's actually all about film collectors who, have contributed to restorations or lost films, or, unfortunately, I haven't had that moment in my life where I have a lost film on 16, but, maybe someday. But yeah,
Mm,
there's a lot of cases of, especially in the early days when they were doing a lot of mail order, like mailing out prints to people that they would rent, or sometimes they would accidentally keep them past their due date, and then decades later, they've contributed to a restoration, or people said, "Wow, we've never actually been able to find that film before." It
mm,
was lost to history, and this collector who just happened to keep something past the due date
mm,
now has this only copy of this film, and I think that happened with a few Lon Chaney senior films, some of the silent films that he did, that
mm.
they were rented out on 16 back in the 20s or 30s, and now they're accessible to everyone because this one collector had the only copy.
Mm.
So there's
Well,
a
there's
lot
so
of
many
interest
good stories,
in that.
aren't there, of these films that were sort of found. Like the other day we watched Joan of Arc, The Passion of Joan of Arc, and they
Oh
found it
yeah.
in the sort of best, the most sort of authentic copy was found in a psychiatric institution in Norway or Sweden, one or the other.
Mhm.
And then ages ago, David and I went to see the Napoleon. What's his name? It's Napoleon. Abel Gance's
Abel
Napoleon,
Gance's Napoleon,
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
and Kevin Brownlow, who's the sort of man behind the sort of restoration of that, has sort of tracked bits down in archives in Argentina and all sorts of New Zealand, and sort of really just like a reel here, a reel there,
Yeah,
just to,
he made it his life work to patch this thing back together from so many different sources. But it all started when he was a boy, and he just got a little, what was it, a 9.5 millimeter sort
Oh
of
yeah.
little sort of reduction print that he'd found from a dealer, and he bought it and took it home, and then he just became completely obsessed with saving this film and tracking it down and getting all the bits and
mm,
putting it back together. And it's an amazing story. And yeah, with Jonathan and I went to see it down in the South Bank at the National Theatre, and they had a big orchestra, Carl Davis conducting,
wow.
and it was
It
quite an
one of the
amazing
most,
day.
well, probably the most extraordinary cinematic experience. It's because it sort
Wow.
of finishes. It's got this, because those old black and white films were in a little square box sort of screen,
Yeah.
but then it opened at the last sort of reel opens up. You've got two other reels, like we've got three cameras, so you've got the middle box and then
Oh,
two at
yeah.
the. Just, I mean, some of the techniques. It was like watching sort of MTV or something. It was so sort of experimental and just
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant. Really, really good.
Yeah. If there's ever anything lost, a lot of collectors, whether intentional or not, are keepers of history.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I think that's it.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm
a
very
thousand
glad that you.
cuts.
Yeah,
Uh,
1,000 Cuts. I'm glad you brought that up because just a few weeks ago, I actually got called for jury service. And that was, I don't know if you've ever done jury service, at least
I
in the
have.
UK, you spend a great deal of time sitting around waiting. That's kind
Yep.
of what jury service is mainly about. And actually, 1,000 Cuts is the book that I read whilst I was sitting around for many, many hours
oh,
waiting.
really? How funny.
Yeah, and it is really excellent, really terrific. Lots of great stories about the sort of shady underworld characters who used to hoard film reels in their basements and stuff when they weren't supposed to be, and
Yeah.
how all the film studios came after them and everything to try and stop them. And the stories about Roddy McDowell, you just have to feel really bad for the poor man because he was this avid collector of film, and then he got raided, and they just took it all off him, just took it all away
Yeah.
from him.
Really?
My
Yeah,
my mentor was around, when that happened. And the whole idea with Roddy McDowell, who had a lot of tapes and a lot of film, was that he was used as the example. This is what's going to
Oh, okay.
happen to you if you are collecting these films illegally. Um, so poor Roddy, yeah, he just happened to be the one that was the big example. I mean, when you have a huge celebrity like that,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But it was really sad. It was quite heartbreaking. I really felt for the guy. Being a collector myself, obviously, but
yeah,
it would just be heartbreaking to just have all your stuff taken off you, and. But anyway, it's a great book. So, listeners, we'll leave a link in the show notes so that you can go and search that out. And another, I just want to briefly mention a film that's really terrific that I discovered maybe about a year ago. It's called Dawson City
oh my
Frozen Time, which is just an amazing film, which is about the story of this cache of old silent films that they found buried in the permafrost up in Canada, up in where was it, in the Yukon
yeah,
somewhere or something. And it's an extraordinary story because this was a little town up north which was kind of the last stop where all the film prints got sent there as the last cinema on the line. And so usually when they got there, they just basically never collected them and never took them back. So they ended up just having this huge stockpile of films that they just threw in a warehouse somewhere. And then eventually they used it, they buried it under like an ice rink or something, didn't they?
yeah,
They just to get rid of them, they just sort of buried them in the ground and then paved over it and then built a skating rink over top.
Huh.
And then many years later in the 70s, they discovered, because they dug it up for whatever reason, and they discovered this treasure trove of all these old
yeah,
films, many of them that had been lost for many years. And it's an extraordinary film because it's kind of part documentary and part kind of abstract sort
yeah.
of where they show all these bits of decay film and little scenes and snippets from all these things that they found, and it's just got this incredible hypnotic effect, and it's really beautiful, absolutely beautiful film that I would definitely urge anyone to go and see.
It's
Terrific.
so beautiful.
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
never heard of that. Never heard of 1,000 cuts. So I'm learning a lot.
Oh,
Thank you.
well, Jonathan, you got some catching up to do.
I
Yeah, I
definitely
do.
do.
Well, we'll put the links in the show notes so that you can get caught up after
Yeah,
the show.
absolutely.
And on that note, I mean, this is an amazing conversation, and I probably could quite happily, Amelia, talk to you for hours and hours and hours about films and about the cinema.
Me too.
But I think, yeah, but I think
We do
there's
have
a
a couple of
couple
films to swap.
films. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have some film swapping to do. Now we should just mention to listeners that Amelia, being in the United States, one of the films the one that Jonathan and I selected and put forward for the show tonight. Unfortunately, Amelia was unable to access it at the moment. It doesn't seem to be available in the United States to stream or anything, and unfortunately, it hasn't been released. I'm hoping that that will change, but so far it hasn't been released on physical media at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Amelia's choice first, and then we're going to talk about the second film. Jonathan and I have seen it, and we're going to talk about it. But because of Amelia's experience as a projectionist and working with film and stuff, I'm absolutely sure that she can offer some insightful comments and things to add to the conversation. So
Definitely.
what we're going to do is just take a very, very brief break. From the listener's point of view, it is literally going to be just a few seconds. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about our first film, which, well, I'll tell you what, we'll just wait and we'll introduce it after the break. So listeners, stay right there. Don't move your ears because we're coming right back.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Audible, and Google Podcasts, or any of your favorite podcast catchers. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show.
Okay, and we are back.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey, and we're back with Amelia Eichler, who is the mistress of the reel, projectionist at UCS. And she's here today. We're going to talk about a film that she has recommended today on our subject, our theme, which we've decided to call The Reel Experience, reel being REEL.
Yes.
So just to clarify that in case anyone thought it was the real, or is that the real? Is REAL? Would that
What
be
is real?
what is real and what's real?
Yeah.
We have no idea, but we're going to try and break that down tonight. So, Amelia, please introduce your film tonight and tell us a little bit about it, if you may. We try and avoid spoilers here, just to say, but you know, we try to avoid spoilers, but don't
Not that
worry
hard.
about it too much. We don't try that hard. We try a little.
It's sort of inevitable, really, isn't it?
Yeah, so I found out about this film for context from my mentor, who, like I said, he has been a projectionist for 50 years. He appropriately recommended me this film, The Smallest Show on Earth, which is very fitting. It's a British film, so not a US film, and it was made in 1957, and it's directed by Basil Dearden. So just a brief synopsis, and I will try to avoid spoilers. It's about a young couple basically who inherit a debt-ridden old movie theater. It's this decrepit movie theater, appropriately nicknamed the Flea Pit. And there are three eccentric senior citizens who work there who are kind of just stuck there in limbo, waiting for someone to take over the theater and let them do their jobs that they're assigned to do. And of course, I chose it because it's about film and it's about running a theater, which I've done before. And it has a projectionist in it who's played by Peter Sellers. He's very hysterical in this film. He's so good in this film.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
And I have kind of a love for decrepit old movie houses. And so I love the idea of this young couple who are kind of these yuppies, so to speak, who just
Yeah,
kind of
yuppies.
stumble upon this theater, and they don't know what to do with it. And I love that it obviously then in 1957 it was supposed to be funny because it was mostly like a silent, they have a lot of dated technology. They have an organ for silent films. They're only running silent films. The workers are senior citizens, so it's supposed to be, oh, that's old. But to us, now that's really old as contemporary viewers. But it does let us explore the history of moviegoing and what practices were used and what it was actually like even in the silent days and also in the 50s to go see a movie and what that
Yeah,
experience was like, which, a lot of us, I'm sure, have not had that experience of seeing a cartoon, and a film all in one, and having a film accompaniment, and have ushers, and at least I haven't. And so I think it's a great look into movie going, and I just love it.
yeah,
It's charming. I love it.
utterly charming, utterly charming. And I'd never heard of it before, and I'm really glad you introduced it to us or me because it's an absolute classic. Got a great cast. I mean, the script is brilliant. I didn't realise until after I sort of watched it and did a bit of research that the scriptwriter
Yeah.
is William. What's his name? He is
William
William
Rose.
Rose. He later went on to win an Oscar for, I think, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and he
Oh
also
yeah, yeah.
wrote the Lady Killers, which is an absolute classic Ealing comedy. And basically, it's a sort
Mhm.
of Ealing comedy that wasn't actually made by Ealing, because I think all the sort of, I mean, Peter Sellers made, I think, Ealing films. Certainly Basil Dearden, he was
Mhm.
renowned for his sort of Ealing films. But this is, I think, their studio had closed by that stage, but the team carried on.
Yeah.
Nobody told them somehow, and. And then of course the main couple is played by Bill Travers and Virginia McKenna, who went on to sort of great fame 10 years later with Born Free,
Mhm.
and they were actually a real sort of couple as well. They were married to each other, and yeah, what a terrific movie.
Mm.
David, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I was the same. I'd not seen it before. I'd kind of heard about it before, but I'd never really had a chance to see it. So I was really glad when you suggested it, and uh, I just really loved it. It's an incredibly charming film, just really delightful. And as you say, Peter Sellers, absolutely brilliant, and he's very funny. I mean, Peter Sellers, he's one of those. Sometimes in his later films, he could kind of like, you know, um, I don't know, I guess kind of overdo it or over egg it a little bit. But I think
Yeah.
in this one, he's just absolutely pitch perfect. He's very funny, obviously playing much older than he actually was at the time, I would think.
Yeah.
And he's just absolutely brilliant. He brings he's very funny, but he brings just that nice little undercurrent of kind of pathos to it, and
Yeah,
um, and I love that beautiful scene, which they don't overdo it at all. It's just a nice brief little moment when the couple comes in and finds the old employees sort of playing an old film on the screen,
mm.
and Martha Rutherford is sitting at the piano, sort of playing along to it, and Peter Sellers gets a bit emotional. He's being a bit sentimental, and that's just a really really beautiful moment that kind of captures that kind of
Yeah.
nostalgia and that feel for that old sort of the silent era of film. And I think it was really beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, that bit was because it's all funny, mostly
Yeah,
funny and sort of light. And
yeah,
then when they watch this silent film, the whole mood of the film sort of shifts into a completely different gear, and it
yeah,
becomes genuinely affecting and moving. And especially it's making a comment about the power of silent cinema as well. And then it goes back to it sort of goes back to being funny again. I mean, it's a terrific funny film, and it does say sort of serious things as well. But that was sort of strange, slightly out of place scene in a way. Well, perhaps not out of place, but it was different to the rest of the movie, I felt.
Yeah, the difference in generations, with the young couple coming in, and then kind of these senior citizens who are stuck essentially
Yeah.
in the past, and how to kind of bridge that throughout the film, which is really beautiful, I think.
Yeah. One thing I also really liked about it was the cinema itself, which
Oh
was
yeah.
all done in the studio. I mean, it was not a real cinema. It wasn't the location they went to. It was sort of made in the studio. But it's the set designers obviously really went to town. They really had fun
Oh
because
yeah.
it looks incredible, absolutely
It does.
hilarious.
Yeah. I don't know about you, Amelia. I've been in cinemas just like that, that were literally just crumbling around you, and the seats were sort of like all splintery and falling apart, and your feet stick to the floor and all that kind of thing. So it really just brought that kind of memory home as well.
Yeah,
And
Yeah, I
I
really
love
wish
that
it were a real
element.
cinema.
Oh, sorry, Amelia, say again.
I wish it were a real cinema that I
yes,
could go
I would go
visit.
there.
I
I would go.
know,
I love the film that, like you say, this couple are kind of like this. They're obviously a more affluent
Yeah.
couple, and they when they get the letter saying that they've inherited this cinema, they're super excited because they just think, oh, it'll be worth some money and we can sell it and have some money, and that's kind of their principal sort of
Yeah.
motivation. And then when they go down there, they get the cinema running again and start it working again, but only so that they can increase the value to try and trick this competitor across the road who has a big, fancy, new, shiny, grand cinema, this giant palace across the way. And
Hmm.
they're trying to trick him to paying more money for the cinema to buy it up. So they're trying to uh, make it look like the cinema's a going concern again, and that it's going to be popular and a good viable business. But then as the film progresses, in that moment that we talked about, that when they uh, see the old people sort of reliving their nostalgia there, that's kind of
Yeah.
the kind of turning point where they start to
Hmm.
feel more differently about it and stop thinking of it just as a business sort of venture or a way of making some money, and they start to see the value in it, and start to feel for the employees, and start to actually feel like they want the cinema to be successful and to work out.
And
So
and
I do. There's one other scene where that always comes to mind when I think of this film, where they start doing gimmicky things in the theater, where there's
yes,
that they're running the film and then there's a desert scene in the
yes,
film, and they turn off the air or the fans, and
yeah,
people are sweating, and all of a sudden they have this woman coming out with drinks that moviegoers can buy, and everyone's sweating. And
yeah,
I just thought it was funny because in the 50s, a lot of gimmicks were having to be used
that's true.
to try to compete with television.
Yeah,
And so I just like that kind of play with
yeah.
that in the film.
mm,
Yeah, very sort of the basic end. Whereas the sort of the studios were doing 3D and they were just turning up the
Mhm.
central heating.
Yes, yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
great. And
I
the bit with the train, I thought was quite great. That they have there's a train line running right behind the cinema, and every time it goes by, the cinema always really shakes, and they have to kind of hold the projector together so it doesn't disintegrate. But
Mm.
it's interesting that every time the train goes by, it's always just at the right moment, so
yes,
that it actually adds to the film. Like it'll be
Yeah.
a bit when there's a train on screen, or there'll be thundering horse hooves going by, and then the whole cinema starts to shake, and it's
yeah.
like just a really funny gag that runs through it a couple times, and it's brilliant.
And one time when that's happening, they go in and they see Peter Sellers basically wrapped around the projector to stop it from falling apart, essentially, which is just
Yeah,
perfect Peter Sellers sort of moment.
yeah, just really wonderful.
Yeah,
Amelia, those bits when there's a moment when the owner of the cinema has to take matters in his own hand, and he has to run the projectors himself because the Peter Sellers character is indisposed, shall we say. So he has to do it himself, and then we have this wonderful scene where he has all these mishaps and the film's running upside down or
Oh yeah.
backwards, or he's put the wrong reel on, or all these different things happen. In your experience as a projectionist, was this a moment that you could relate to at all? I mean, obviously it was exaggerated for comic effect, but can you relate any kind of experiences like that where you've had projection mishaps?
Well, we had I mean this thankfully one of these wasn't thankfully in front of an audience, but we got a 16 millimeter projector that was kind of just installed and put together, and it was new. And we had some film that was double perforation, so there wasn't a soundtrack. So there wasn't, it was difficult for us to orient which way we should be threading the film. And it was also a European projector. So the way that we would normally thread it, it was the opposite, which we also didn't know. And so not only did we not know which way the reel was supposed to be facing because there was no soundtrack, it was also the opposite from a normal American projector. And so we were threading some 16, and all of a sudden there was this skiing scene, but the skier was going backwards and it was also upside down.
Oh my
And I was
goodness.
like, yeah, I don't think that's right. I don't think this is an experimental film. I think maybe this is our fault. And I've also had pieces of a projector come off during a screening in front of an audience,
Oh,
and I'm
wow.
pacing in the booth trying to figure out how to fix it, or am I going to have to offer everyone a refund? So I related a bit to that scene.
Yeah,
Oh gosh.
brilliant.
Well, yeah, it's a pretty fun moment. I actually watched it with one of my boys, and he loved that. He was in stitches
Yeah,
Oh, I love that.
during that moment. So it's pretty terrific, pretty fun film.
I remember meeting somebody who used to either lived in Cambridge or went to Cambridge University, and there was a cinema. I think it may still be there, called the Cambridge Arts Cinema. And they said they used to go regularly to see films there, and there was this one sort of patron who basically, if the film wasn't exactly in focus, they'd go
Mhm.
until the projectionist basically got it in focus. Just brilliant.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, well, that's great. Well, was there anything else that we wanted to talk about? The smallest show on earth.
Oh, it's one little thing. The name
Mhm.
of the film obviously comes from, it's like a sort of joke on the biggest show on earth, which
Mhm.
is in the news at the moment because Steven Spielberg, that was the film he went to see back with his dad in the early 50s, which makes it into The Fabelmans. And it's also the film that won the Oscar that High Noon lost out to in our Oscars episode. So anyway, that's a little bit of trivia for
Yeah,
you.
yes, brilliant. I guess this film would have only come out like sort of 5 or 6 years after The Greatest Show on Earth. So I guess
Yeah,
the title is just meant to be a little play on that as
yeah,
well, isn't it? So
yeah.
Yeah,
right.
I can't quite find this online anywhere, but if I remember there was, and I don't know if it has to do with, an American title, or I think this film also goes by another title, which confused me a bit at first, but I remember I can't quite find it, of course, now that I'm
The
looking.
Big
But
Time Operators,
Big.
apparently
yeah,
it was
yeah,
originally distributed in the US under that title, Big Time Operators.
yeah.
So
Oh, funny.
it's brilliant.
That's what it says on Wiki. Yeah,
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to say about the cast? There's Margaret Rutherford, who's brilliant as the old lady, wasn't
so
she?
funny.
I
So,
love those little moments when they go to them and they obviously bicker, her character and Peter Sellers, and they bicker a lot. But then when the owners come to them and say, "Well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to fire them?" And they go, "Oh no, 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 you can't do that."
yeah,
It's brilliant. I love it. It's just a lovely film. And it's very short as well, wasn't it? I think that was one thing about it. It was like
yeah.
because we've talked about quite a few quite long films recently.
Hmm.
So
Mm,
I know
crikey.
um, we when I mentioned to Jonathan, well, it was only like about 80 minutes long. I know there was this great sense of relief
That's
because
good.
last week we talked about Heaven's Gate, which is sort of like 4
Oh yeah.
hours. So it's like so that's brilliant.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
one last thing actually.
sure, go
So I
ahead.
think because the director Basil Dearden or Basil Dearden,
Hmm.
he so I think sort of he had a bit of a bad rep, I believe. And for instance, who was it that said, yeah, David Thompson didn't like him, and the sort of the very esteemed film critic. And I've got this book, Ealing Studios, here by Charles Barr. I don't know if you've
Okay.
heard of that, but it's like the sort of the definitive book on Ealing, I think, pretty much. Anyway, it's a sort of second edition, and he has a little piece at the end about the director, basically saying, first in the first edition, I was very rude about Basil Dearden, but now, actually, on consideration, I think he's pretty good. And he's got this little sort of essay on the virtues of Basil Dearden and why he's actually you should give him more credit. So yeah,
Right. So why didn't he like him in the first place then?
I'm not sure. I can't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Well, at least he changed his mind, which is
Yeah.
the
exactly,
main thing.
exactly.
It's
Yeah,
nice to think in an age when everyone is so rigid in their thinking. It's nice to think that people could be persuaded about something.
very true.
So it's brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant. Okay, Amelia, was there any other anything else you wanted to comment on the Small Show on Earth?
No, it's, I'm surprised, and obviously there's a lot of overlooked films, or, it's again with streaming, right? As we said, a lot of titles are unknown to people, or I haven't heard really anyone talk about this film before.
Hmm.
And a lot of even people who are film projectionists, I've never heard them mention, or if I do mention it to them, it's, oh, I'd never heard of that film. So I hope that some of the listeners do actually take time to watch it, because it is such a hidden gem, as people say.
Absolutely,
It's such a good time, and it's so charming. So I really do hope that people give it a chance.
definitely a terrific choice.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a great choice, and thank you very much, Amelia, for bringing it to our attention because neither of us had seen it before, and that's really great. And hopefully, some listeners out there will take the plunge. In the United States, how did you access it? Just so if people are interested in checking it out, how could they find it?
So when I watched it, and I don't know if this is accessible to everyone, but pbs.org, that's a station here, has it for free.
Oh,
So
wow,
if you just type in the smallest show on earth, it's the first result, and so that's how I watched it. And it's also
brilliant.
on Daily Motion as well.
Oh, Daily Motions, yeah, very good. Sometimes they have a lot of public domain things and stuff on there. That's a great resource as well.
Yeah, so
Um,
that's how I watched it.
okay, brilliant. So, well, yeah, well, free, you can't get any better than that. You can't argue with that.
Yeah,
So it's definitely
yeah.
worth going to check out. And Jono, how did you watch it here in the UK?
I
It's
watched it on Amazon Prime.
okay. Was that a
I rented
rental?
it. I think it was about £2.50.
All right.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, and yep, it was
Okay.
quite easy. Actually, fairly easy to get.
Well, it is also, I can hold this up for the people who are watching the video version of the show. There is a Blu ray available from Network Video. which I ended up getting because I looked the same as Jonathan. I was just going to rent it on Amazon Prime, but when I looked on Amazon, the Blu-ray was pretty much the same price, or maybe like about maybe a quid or something more. So I
Yeah.
said, well, I'll just buy a copy, and then I'll be able to watch
Smart
it more than
thinking.
once and have it. We got some sad news actually over the last week. A Network Video, which is the label that released this, and have released a lot of really classic British film and television shows. They've actually gone into receivership,
Oh
which was a
man.
bit of bad news over the last couple of weeks because they are quite a great label just for putting out a lot of obscure stuff. But I guess maybe that's partly why they've run into some troubles because there's not as much of a market nowadays. So I think if people would be interested, it is a great Blu-ray. It's very, very good transfer, and they've got a few little bits and pieces as extra sort of,
Oh nice.
kind of bonus materials on it and things as well. So if you're interested in getting a copy of that, it's not very expensive, and but you might want to hurry because obviously if networks go on, presumably those are going to dry up
Yeah.
That's a shame.
soon. So, well, however listeners choose to find it, please do because it's a great film. It's terrific.
Yeah.
Um, what we're going to do now is we're going to just take another brief little break. So, listeners, just please sit right where you are because we're only going to be going for a few seconds. And when we come back, we're going to talk about our second film, Zhang Yimou's 1 Second, a more recent film that comes from China. So, in just one moment, we will be back. Stay tuned.
You can follow the Film Swap on social media. We're on Twitter and TikTok at Film Swap UK, on Instagram at Film Swap Media, and on YouTube at Film Swap_podcast, and at Facebook at Film Swap the Podcast.
All right, and listeners, we're back. Welcome back to Film Swap, and with our very, very special guest, Amelia Eichler, who's joining us from Los Angeles in the United States. Our second film today, I think I'll let Jonathan introduce this, just mainly because I've been just talking a lot, or at least I feel like I have been. So I'm going to let him introduce our second film, which is called 1 Second.
Yes, it's called 1 Second, and it's directed by Zhang Yimou. Please excuse my appalling pronunciation. And he is, I would say, probably the most sort of the biggest name in sort of Chinese cinema that I mean, from my limited knowledge of it. And he has his films. I've seen 4 of his. I think now I've seen 4 of his films. In the 80s, he made a film called Red Sorghum, which is set during the sort of Japanese invasion of China in the 30s or 40s. And in the 90s, he made a great film called Raise High the Red Lantern.
Yeah,
And then
brilliant.
really good film as well. And then in the 2000s, Raise High the Red Lantern, I think is sort of in the sort of 16th, 17th century, sort of a costume drama. And then in the 2000s, he made around the time of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, he made a film called what was it called?
House of Flying Daggers.
Thank you very much. House of Flying Daggers and also Hero, both of which are terrific movies.
With Jet Li, yeah.
With Jet Li, which are sort of wuxia or sort of kung fu movies, basically. And then this film, which is interesting, it's a great film about cinema, which we will talk about in a moment. But part of the thing that's interesting about it is that it's based on a novel and by a Chinese-American novelist called The Criminal Lu Yanxi by Gailing Yan. And he'd actually made another film based on the same book. So I think it might be quite a sort of thick book. Unfortunately, it hasn't come out in English yet. I looked for it. But one of his other films from, I think, 2012 called Coming Home is another story from this sort of book. And so Yeah, but it's a terrific movie. What do you think, David?
Well, I know we have Amelia at a bit of a disadvantage here because she hasn't seen it. So
Yes.
I guess I can just go over briefly, kind of give you a quick summary of the plot.
Yeah.
The film, I think, is set in the early 70s, and it's kind of just during the period, I guess, in China, what they call the Cultural Revolution. And it is to do with a man who is basically a prisoner. He's been put into
Labor
like a
camp.
work camp, a prison camp for fighting. He got into a fight with a military guard or something and hit them, and so he's ended up going to prison. But what he does is he escapes because he is told by another inmate who saw a newsreel in the cinema that has his daughter in it. So he
Mm.
escapes from the work camp in order that he can go and see this film that's got his daughter in it. So then what happens is we have these beautiful landscapes of him basically trudging through what's essentially a desert region
Yep.
to go to this small town to catch this newsreel, which basically they basically bundle these prints of a program of films together and then go from town to town and show it in the local cinema there. To great fanfare and everything, because I guess it's sort of a only a sporadic community event when these films show up and they show them in the cinema. So he misses the screening. He doesn't get to the town in time, but then he learns that the film is being shown in the next town down the road. But as he's preparing to leave to go there, he sees a young girl steal one of the canisters of film from the courier's bike and run off with it. And then he, of course, chases after her and catches her. And then what ensues is the film is predominantly about the relationship that develops between this man and this what turns out to be this young orphan girl who is trying to steal film prints, but for a completely different reason than what his interest is. But the two of them form this unlikely sort of friendship, and he goes to this town or village, which is the next one along, to see this film. But what happens is, in while the film is being transported from one town to the next, there's some sort of an accident. I think the courier's bike breaks down, and so the films are bundled onto somebody's cart, like horse and cart, and one of them breaks open, and the film ends up getting dragged across the sort of the
The
dirt
desert.
gravel roads all the way to the village. So then we have this wonderful, wonderful time with this amazing character in the film who they call Mr. Movie in the
Yeah, he's the
town.
projectionist.
He's the projectionist in the town. So much like yourself, Amelia, he runs the town cinema. And whenever one of these film programs shows up and he can show it, there's great ballyhoo and excitement in the village because they're showing a film. And so he holds a position in this town of great authority and respect.
Uh-huh.
He's such a wonderful character because he's kind of, he has a little bit of an ego and he's kind of like he's got a bit of that alpha male, I'm
Mhm.
kind of cock of the walk of the town because he holds such an important esteemed position in this village. Uh, but then he also has responsibilities in terms of making sure that the films are safe and they get
Mhm.
sent on to the next place. So he's in a bit of a tricky situation. So they have this wonderful, wonderful scene where he gets the entire town. Everybody jumps in and gets involved in cleaning the film
Oh, I
and
love
getting it
that.
ready to be projected, because at first he's kind of like, oh, that's it, the film's off, we can't do it because it's been trashed. But then everyone's like, oh no, we can't, we're not going to have a film. But then he goes, okay, I'll tell you what, we're going to save this, we're going to do this. And then he starts ordering people around saying, okay, you go and get some pots so we can distill some water, and you you guys get some cleaning wool so we can do this, and everybody, you go and hang some things up here, and it becomes this big, huge sort of production. It's absolutely wonderful how they slowly clean this film and get it back wound onto reels and stuff under this man's direction. And it's absolutely wonderful. And what it does too is it really shows the kind of the fragility of it, and how the film, you know, how fragile film, reels, especially back in those times, were. And it also just shows this wonderful sense of community, and the fact that
Yeah.
this whole community comes together for this really important event, and how important it all is to them, and how they all muck in and support and work together to get this thing sorted out. So it's absolutely wonderful, really beautiful. And then it's all underlines this story between this escaped convict and this orphan girl, who form this unlikely friendship, and we learn a
Hmm.
bit more about why the man is there in the town, and Mr. Movie gets involved in this, and we see a little bit from him about his both his authoritarianism, but also his
Hmm.
compassion as well, and how he deals with this situation. So I won't go any further because obviously I don't want to spoil the film for people who haven't seen it yet, including yourself. Um, but I absolutely loved it. And when we were talking, Jonathan and myself, about the theme for the film, about talking about the cinematic experience and the kind of the communal aspect of film going, and this was the film that immediately jumped to my head as something I'd seen recently. It's a 2020 film, so it
Yeah.
came out,
Hmm.
I guess, during the pandemic and things, November of 2020.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely just wonderful, beautifully shot, and beautifully told, and I think it's just absolutely terrific film.
Yeah. Well, a few things that come to mind is one is that it's apparently shot in Dunhuang, which is a region of China where they found these Buddhist caves, very famous Buddhist caves. There, it's on the Silk Route going to sort of India, and they found, I think, in the early 20th century, behind a sort of false wall, like huge piles of scripture. And there's an international project called the Dunhuang project, which is all these sort of universities which have these things, and they're trying to sort of decipher them. Still going through all these piles and piles of scriptures. Anyway, but it's just a very beautiful landscape. He filmed it. But one of the things that, yeah, the cleaning scene, this is really, it's very sort of ingenious the way he does it. And it's
Hmm.
also lovely, it's got a lovely humor to it as well. But it's also sort of got an almost ritualistic sort of feel to it. And they're sort of, the film is almost like a sort of sacred object, perhaps
Yeah.
sort of, perhaps in the way that the scriptures were in the caves nearby there, but in a way, actually,
Hmm.
come to think of it. But one thing that this film shares, or two things that this film shares in common with your choice, is one is
Hmm.
that the audience watching it, because one of the great things in the smallest show on earth is the audience are extremely physical, incredibly engaged with the movies, aren't they? Those scenes of the sort of the camera sort of showing the audience responding to the movies, and this one they're all, it's more, I guess they're more rapt and sort of just, but it's really great. And then the other thing that's really that has a sort of similarity is inside the projection booth,
Oh.
and they've got a very another really clapped out old projection, projector, like in the smallest show on earth, and somebody who basically knows, it's like, I guess it's one of those machines that only the owner or the sort of caretaker of it knows how to work it.
Yeah.
Uh, like a sort of, I remember reading something about somebody trying getting on a bicycle, and it was a postman's bicycle, and only that postman could ride it. And they got on it, and they found that it was completely useless. But it was sort of a bit like that. Yeah, it's really. Terrific. Oh yes, another thing that occurred to me is that in Hero, especially, there's Zhang Yimou uses lots. Have you seen Hero?
Yeah.
Terrific movie. You know, he's very there's a very sort of pronounced color palette, isn't there? Sort of various scenes
Hmm.
have different colors, and so this one also there's a sort of the color plays a big sort of part in it, and then uh, towards the end, the sort of colors change when there's a sort of basically a change in the regime. When it's not giving anything away, the Cultural Revolution does come to an end, and then the sort of colours change as well, and it goes
Hmm.
from a very sort of washed out, sort of sandy look to sort of a bit bolder colours. Um, yeah. Anyway, that's my little tuppence worth, basically.
Well, and again, I don't want to give away the ending for anyone, but it is really beautifully poetic, isn't it, Jonathan? The way that it
Yeah.
ties in, because the key plot point of the film is that this man who's been estranged from his family and from his daughter because he's been sent to prison. And the reason why the film's called 1 second is because there is this 1 second of his daughter in this
Yeah.
newsreel, and this footage is the
Hmm.
center point for him, as just way of having a memory and an image of his past and his regrets for his loss. And
Hmm.
at the end of the film, there's a really poignant and beautiful sort of metaphor for just how fragile, in terms of some of the things we talked about a film as history and as preserving our memories and our culture and our heritage and all those things, but how fragile it is as a and how important it is to try and preserve it and protect it, because it is so fleeting and so easy to lose that. And I
Yeah.
think that is another key thing in this film that really beautifully kind of um, says that about just how important it is to preserve our culture and these things. And I think it's really really beautiful. Um, Really beautiful film.
Yeah.
And I really loved it a lot. So I'm really keen for anyone who's listening out there, and Amelia, when you get a chance to check it out, because it's such a great thing.
Very true.
Yeah, I really hope I can access it at some point. Um,
Yeah,
I don't know the status of it getting released on disc
yeah,
because a lot of, newer films don't necessarily sometimes have a
yeah.
disc release, but I really hope that the US rights can like get figured out so that more people can watch it because it sounds
Mm.
so beautiful and
Mm.
so up my alley.
But it's quite interesting when we talk about the availability things and like newer films that some films are quite literally not being released on any kind of physical format now. I mean, I would hope, because Zhang Yimou is quite a prominent director,
Mhm.
and this is such a good film that hopefully somebody out there will pick it up at some point and release it on a Blu-ray or something, because I would certainly be first in line to get a copy of it, because I really like it a lot.
Mm.
Um, but here in the UK, it's available on Mubi, the streaming service, and I think it's also available as a rental on Amazon Prime. So
Yes.
is that how you watched it, Jonathan?
Funnily enough, when I went into Amazon Prime, it said you got to sign up for a Mubi and
Oh,
watch it through Mubi. But then I went into the sort of home page of the sort of smart TV and put in the name of it, and then it took me into Amazon Prime, but not having to sign up to Mubi and just watching it sort of as an individual, discrete film. So
all right.
it's a bit weird.
So
But
there you go.
anyway,
So it's a very complex situation, folks, for seeing this
completely
film for
daft.
some reason. But but it's definitely worth the effort if you go out and
Yeah.
try and see it, because it's really beautiful and quite a moving piece of work, and really
Yeah,
entertaining, and has lots of really funny moments
yeah,
and things as well. So it's good stuff. So go out
definitely.
and find
Yeah.
it. So is there any last things you wanted to say, Jono, about 1 second?
No, good film and a good one to watch with The Smallest Show on Earth. A good pair they are.
Yeah,
It does sound like a perfect pair.
very much so. They have a lot of very common threads that run through them, and it's kind of what we were going for today. Is like we wanted to celebrate the actual cinema going experience and film as a medium, and how important it is. And hopefully it won't. Hopefully it'll be like vinyl, that maybe one day all of a sudden people will suddenly wake up and go, hey, actually this is pretty cool. So maybe
Yeah.
we should go back and have another go at this. So we'll see. We shall see.
We shall see. Absolutely.
So Amelia, thank you so much
Mm-hmm.
for joining us tonight. You've been absolutely awesome.
Thank you very much.
And I know we had a few issues because of the time zone differences and stuff. We had some sort of jostling about to try and get a good time when we could all sit down together and have a chat. But I'm glad we've done that, and it's been really great having you. And is there anything you wanted to give a little shout out to, or anything that you could you want to draw some attention to while you're here on the show?
Yeah, so if you're interested in learning more about projection or film handling and like the basics, I would recommend people check out Sprocket School. And they're, a nonprofit website that has all kind of really in-depth, detailed information about projectors and projecting and film handling and different kinds of film prints and soundtracks. And so all the little technical things that maybe most people aren't familiar with, I think that's a good source for people who are maybe interested in learning about physical film and don't quite know where to start. I often refer to it as well sometimes when I'm working, just as a good like reference. So I would definitely recommend that website. And yeah, I definitely would love if people, had any questions about projection, or maybe they're trying to figure out how to befriend a projectionist or maybe learn how to project. You can reach out to me on Twitter. My username is Sleepy Serenade. Or you could type in Mistress of the Real, and that'll also come up. And yeah, just feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk about film at all and have any questions. I'll try my best to point you towards resources like Sprocket School, or other resources. And yeah, I just love talking about film. So.
Oh, brilliant. And we'll definitely include some links and things in the show notes as well, so you can seek out Amelia. Because it's been absolutely awesome talking to you, and hopefully maybe you'll come back again and have another chat
I'd
with
love
us
to be
another
back.
time.
Cool.
Yeah, because I'm sure there's millions of great films out there that we could talk about. So we definitely love to have you back another time.
Definitely.
I'll be
Fantastic.
back.
Great, fantastic. All right, well, thanks again, Amelia, and thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, listeners, for joining us today. Just a little bit of housekeeping, too. I would just mention that because of various holidays and other personal commitments and things, the film swap factoids have we've gone a little bit quiet on that front over the last couple of weeks, but I just want to assure you factoid fans out there that Film Swap Factoids will be back over the next couple of weeks. So you might want to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss out. But we also eventually push them out on the other platforms, TikTok and Facebook and all that as well. So wherever you happen to do your social media-ness, by all means, look us up because we're out there causing trouble of some kind or another. Oh, and I wanted to do a quick shout out as well. If anyone saw our silly little skit with the three old ladies, I just wanted to give a shout out to my great friends, Farrah Shaw, Sarah Scarborough, and Sarah McQuaid, who are some really great, talented actresses who I've been very lucky and fortunate enough to tread the boards with them a few times here in the UK. And they were very lovely sports and came out and helped me out putting that little video together. So I just wanted to give a little shout out to them because they're totally awesome mates of mine. And I just wanted to give them a shout out. So, All right. Well, on that note, then, I'm going to say goodbye. And listeners, thanks for joining us today. And we will see you again in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned for more surprises and watch great films in the meantime.
Take care.
All right.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye for now. Cheers.
Bye.
Oh, the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.